India will not just maintain its relationship with Moscow, but will also expand its ties with Russia. That was the underlined message that was sent out from Moscow by India's External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar as he went for a significant meeting there with his counterpart Sergey Lavrov, and also met the Deputy Prime Minister there as well. Now, this was in keeping with the exchanges that we've seen between the two sides, despite the Western pressure on India to reassess its relationship with Moscow in the wake of the Ukraine war. Today, what S Jaishankar has said is quite significant because it not just underlined and reiterated the phrase steadfast, time-tested relationship or a historical relationship between the two sides, but he also added another step or point to that. He said this relationship in the recent past has also proven to be advantageous to both sides. He said if there is a realistic assessment or an evaluation of the relationship, it is very clear to see that both sides have benefited from this, and this has augured very, very well for both India and Russia. To a very specific question with regards to what India's stand is going to be with regards to the G7 countries wanting to come out with the price capping on Russian oil, largely because they believe that it is this revenue from the export of oil that Russia is using to fuel the war in Ukraine, and therefore this energy export of Russia, they want to cut down on that revenue and coming up with this pricing of Russian oil. So basically what it means is that they will set a particular price. If any country takes oil from Russia on a price higher than that, then largely the European countries which provide the insurance for transport of this cargo will not be doing so. So the countries will have to offtake this oil at their own risk and transport it. India so far has been non-committal on the G7 price capping issue. Today, S Jaishankar pretty much made it clear that there was hardly any question of going along with the G7, because he pointed out once again that a country like India that has to, in fact, because of the developing status, consumes a lot of energy, third highest consumer, with incomes not very high, needs to look for sources of energy which are affordable. And therefore, in that context, Russia has stepped into that scenario. Remember, India has increased its imports of oil from Russia drastically over the last few months. Just before the war in Ukraine, India's oil offtake from Russia was anywhere between 1 to 2%, and that has drastically grown over the last 7 to 8 months now. In October, the data that has come through via energy cargo companies depicts that this has gone up to almost 22%. India is getting this at a discounted rate, and therefore India says that it has to supply to its own people energy which is affordable, and therefore its own energy security is paramount and priority for it, and therefore the relationship and the oil offtake, the import of oil from Russia is going to continue. So again, another important message sent out just ahead of the G20 summit in Bali, for which Prime Minister Modi will be travelling, and it is expected that during this summit there could be talks by the Western nations with India to try and understand whether India is looking at being part of this G7 formula. But clearly now External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar has pretty much made it clear that no, the underlined and the emphasis of India's stand on this issue and the argument that it has presented in the past continues to hold, that India needs energy. Its energy consumption is high, and therefore it needs to be affordable. India has also pointed out that look what happened in the past. India reduced its oil intake from Iran because of the unilateral sanctions by America. It had brought it down to zero in 2018. A similar situation with regards to Venezuela, from where the offtake of oil was not happening. This had rather created a crisis for India, and therefore just looking, or rather not looking at the option of Russia would not have been in India's interest. So that is about energy security, and a clear message being sent out from Moscow, from External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar on it. Meanwhile, on the other aspects, of course, India has reiterated and once again pointed out that dialogue and diplomacy needs to be given a chance and the war in Ukraine needs to stop. This is a stand that India has taken and on public platforms several times over, also reiterated, though there again has been criticism earlier on from the West that India's neutral stand on this issue is not really being seen as neutral, since India has according to them, not sided with the Western world or specifically with Ukraine on this issue, because it continues its engagement with Russia and has not turned it into a pariah. Meanwhile, India has also on other occasions, for instance, when Rajnath Singh had a telephone conversation with his Russian counterpart, made it very clear that despite this entire nuclear rhetoric, it must be remembered that nuclear option is not to be resorted to by any of the sides. So that messaging has constantly gone out from the Indian side. Also, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Vladimir Putin in Samarkand, he said, this is not the era for war. And you've clearly seen as well that there has been a slight tweaking in the kind of messaging from the Western world as well, from in fact being extremely critical of India for taking what India said a neutral stand on this entire conflict. They have now changed their narrative to suggest that India should perhaps play the role of peacemaker or mediator. Now, India has already been making this call to both the Russian and the Ukrainian side that the war must end, dialogue and diplomacy should be given a chance. In pretty much in its own way, India has been asking for an end to this war, and that has been seen even now, even when India is pointing out that its relationship with Russia remains historical, steadfast, but this point of the war and the crisis that it has created with regards to energy, food or fertilizer must be brought to an end, because it's creating only misery globally.